What do we call the machine that provides drinking water in an office? What do we call the machine that provides drinking water in an office? Water cooler. What do we call a private teacher who gives you lessons outside school hours? What do we call a private teacher who gives you lessons outside school hours? Tutor. What will happen to a balloon if you inflate it beyond its capacity? What will happen to a balloon if you inflate it beyond its capacity? Blast. What is the process you do when you are not satisfied with a verdict of your lawsuit? What is the process you do when you are not satisfied with a verdict of your lawsuit? Appeal. What do we call the home of some kinds of wild animals like foxes? What do we call the home of some kinds of wild animals like foxes? Den. Which word can be used to describe an inexperienced person, fledgling or veteran? Which word can be used to describe an inexperienced person, fledgling or veteran? Fledgling. What is a person whose job deals with the people who call or enter an office, hotel, etc.? What is a person whose job deals with the people who call or enter an office, hotel, etc.? Receptionist. What do we call the natural color of the skin on a person's face? What do we call the natural color of the skin on a person's face? Complexion. What should we call a permanent mark on a person's skin since his or her birth? What should we call a permanent mark on a person's skin since his or her birth? Birthmark. How to describe people who are the original, earliest known inhabitants of a region. How to describe people who are the original, earliest known inhabitants of a region. Indigenous. What is the formal name of breathing? What is the formal name of breathing? Respiration. How to stimulate an individual's immune system to develop adaptive immunity to a kind of viral. How to stimulate an individual's immune system to develop adaptive immunity to a kind of viral. Vaccinate. What is the tallest living quadruped animal in the world? What is the tallest living quadruped animal in the world? Giraffe. Lettuce and carrots come under which category? Lettuce and carrots come under which category? Vegetable. What is the yearly recurrence of the date of a past event? What is the yearly recurrence of the date of a past event? Anniversary. What kind of animal does hippopotamus belong to, herbivore or carnivore? What kind of animal does hippopotamus belong to, herbivore or carnivore? Herbivore. What is the state distress experienced by an individual who is suddenly exposed to a new or foreign cultural environment? What is the state distress experienced by an individual who is suddenly exposed to a new or foreign cultural environment? Culture shock. How many legs do quadruped animals have? How many legs do quadruped animals have? 4. What is the fruit with hairy shells and milky juice inside? Coconut. What is the fruit with hairy shells and milky juice inside? Coconut. What is the handheld electric device that blows hot air to your hair? What is the handheld electric device that blows hot air to your hair? Hair dryer. Which word is more related to peasants, industry, or agriculture? Which word is more related to peasants, industry, or agriculture? Agriculture. What is the antonym of depression, and especially is used to describe financial success? What is the antonym of depression, and especially is used to describe financial success? Prosperity. Which word belongs to insects, mantis, or lettuce? Which word belongs to insects, mantis, or lettuce? Mantis. Which vitamin is essential for the formation of normal bones and teeth? Which vitamin is essential for the formation of normal bones and teeth? Vitamin D. What is the architecture with smooth, steeply sloping sides meeting at an apex, used as a tomb? What is the architecture with smooth, steeply sloping sides meeting at an apex, used as a tomb? Pyramid. What do we call a stone that is transparent, and when it is cut and polished, valued as a precious gem? What do we call a stone that is transparent, and when it is cut and polished, valued as a precious gem? Diamond. Which one belongs to Oriental countries, Japan or Canada? Which one belongs to Oriental countries, Japan or Canada? Japan. Which climate zone do the countries like Vietnam and Thailand belong to? Which climate zone do the countries like Vietnam and Thailand belong to? Tropical zone. What is the opposite situation of flood? What is the opposite situation of flood? Drought. What do we call an underground pipe that is used to carry sewage away from houses? What do we call an underground pipe that is used to carry sewage away from houses? Sewer. Which heavenly body does the word lunar relate to? Which heavenly body does the word lunar relate to? Moon. What do we call the line in the far distance where the sky seems to meet the land or the sea? What do we call the line in the far distance where the sky seems to meet the land or the sea? Horizon. What is the system of American government? Fe- What is the system of American government? Federalism. What is the southernmost continent in the earth? What is the southernmost continent in the earth? Antarctica. What do we call the son of a king or queen? What do we call the son of a king or queen? Prince. What do we call a piece of iron that attracts objects made of iron towards it? What do we call a piece of iron that attracts objects made of iron towards it? Magnet. What do we call one half of the earth, especially the half above or below the equator? What do we call one half of the earth, especially the half above or below the equator? Hemisphere. What is the force that things fall to the ground when they are dropped in the earth? What is the force that things fall to the ground when they are dropped in the earth? Gravity. What do we call an expert who studies birds? What do we call an expert who studies birds? Ornithologist. What do we call an opening or a door in the deck of a ship or the bottom of an aircraft, through which goods to be carried are passed? What do we call an opening or a door in the deck of a ship or the bottom of an aircraft, through which goods to be carried are passed? Hatch. How do we describe something that can be processed and used again? How do we describe something that can be processed and used again? Recyclable. What do we call a company that pays the cost of an event in order to advertise? What do we call a company that pays the cost of an event in order to advertise? Sponsor. What do we call the dark area that sometimes appears on the sun's surface? What do we call the dark area that sometimes appears on the sun's surface? Sunspot. What do we call a female heir, especially one who has received or will receive a large amount of money? What do we call a female heir, especially one who has received or will receive a large amount of money? Heiress. Which organ of our body is related to the word gastric? Which organ of our body is related to the word gastric? Stomach. What do we call a small open area of grass in a forest? Gl- What do we call a small open area of grass in a forest? Glade. What do we call an entertainer who performs difficult physical acts such as jumping and balancing, especially in a circus? What do we call an entertainer who performs difficult physical acts such as jumping and balancing, especially in a circus? Acrobat. What do we call the condition of being unable to sleep? What do we call the condition of being unable to sleep? Insomnia. How many millimeters is 1 centimeter equal to? How many millimeters is 1 centimeter equal to? 10. What do we call the length of a line that goes around a circle or any other curved shape? What do we call the length of a line that goes around a circle or any other curved shape? Circumference. What do we call the regular beating of blood through your body, and you can feel it especially when you touch your wrist? What do we call the regular beating of blood through your body, and you can feel it especially when you touch your wrist? Pulse. Which organ does the word cerebral relate to? Which organ does the word cerebral relate to? Brain. What do we call an animal or plant that has parents of different species or varieties? What do we call an animal or plant that has parents of different species or varieties? Hybrid. What is the chemical that is used to make cloth white? What is the chemical that is used to make cloth white? Bleach. What do we call a small bed for a baby that can be pushed gently from side to side? What do we call a small bed for a baby that can be pushed gently from side to side? Cradle. What do we call a person who gives evidence in court? What do we call a person who gives evidence in court? Witness. What do we call the army that fight on horses? What do we call the army that fight on horses? Cavalry. How do we call the soldiers that fight on foot? How do we call the soldiers that fight on foot? Infantry. Which word is related to physical disability, handicap, or obstacle? Which word is related to physical disability, handicap, or obstacle? Handicap. What do we call animals with no backbone? What do we call animals with no backbone? Invertebrate. What do we call a very young form of an insect that looks like a worm? What do we call a very young form of an insect that looks like a worm? Larva. Which word is used to refer to a person who learns skills from others, master or apprentice? Which word is used to refer to a person who learns skills from others, master or apprentice? Apprentice. What is the part that is inside a nut's or a seed's shell? What is the part that is inside a nut's or a seed's shell? Kernel. What is the behavior and beliefs of a particular group of people in society that are different from those of most people? What is the behavior and beliefs of a particular group of people in society that are different from those of most people? Subculture.
What do we call a player who replaces another player in a sports game? What do we call a player who replaces another player in a sports game? Substitute. What do we call a student who works for a period of time at a job to get experience? What do we call a student who works for a period of time at a job to get experience? Intern. What do we call the poisonous liquid that snakes produce? What do we call the poisonous liquid that snakes produce? Venom. What do we call the animals kept in a farm? What do we call the animals kept in a farm? Livestock. Which device allows us to see very tiny things like bacteria? Which device allows us to see very tiny things like bacteria? Microscope. What is the candle made of? What is the candle made of? Wax. How many months does a trimester have? How many months does a trimester have? 3. What do we call the subject related to financial considerations? What do we call the subject related to financial considerations? Economics. What do we call the study of designing buildings? What do we call the study of designing buildings? Architecture. What do we call the main subject or course of a student at college or university? What do we call the main subject or course of a student at college or university? Major. What do we call a person who pays rent to the landlord? What do we call a person who pays rent to the landlord? Lessee. What do we call a book listing acronyms? What do we call a book listing acronyms? Abbreviation dictionary. What do you call the facts, signs, or objects that make you believe something is true? What do you call the facts, signs, or objects that make you believe something is true? Evidence. What is the psychology fear after an accident called? What is the psychology fear after an accident called? PTSD. What is the shape of the Earth's orbit? Oval. What is the shape of the Earth's orbit? Oval. What is the punctuation used at the end of a sentence? What is the punctuation used at the end of a sentence? Full stop. What is the part of each day after sunset called? What is the part of each day after sunset called? Evening. What do we call an underground train system? What do we call an underground train system? Metro. What do we call the process in which people move to a foreign country in order to live and work permanently? What do we call the process in which people move to a foreign country in order to live and work permanently? Immigration. What do we call the insect or animal that destroys plants and food? What do we call the insect or animal that destroys plants and food? Pest. What is the hard substance that is formed by the bones of very small sea animals? What is the hard substance that is formed by the bones of very small sea animals? Coral. Which instrument would you use for weighting things? Ruler, scale, or thermometer? Which instrument would you use for weighting things? Ruler, scale, or thermometer? Scale. What do we call the place for showing the works of art? What do we call the place for showing the works of art? Gallery. How do we describe something that exists all the time? How do we describe something that exists all the time? Permanent. What kind of gas is necessary for the survival of most living animals? What kind of gas is necessary for the survival of most living animals? Oxygen. What do we call a person who owns shares in a company or business? What do we call a person who owns shares in a company or business? Shareholder. What do we call the people we work together with? What do we call the people we work together with? Coworker. What do we call a person who starts a company and deals business? What do we call a person who starts a company and deals business? Entrepreneur. In a company, who is responsible for keeping financial accounts? In a company, who is responsible for keeping financial accounts? Accountant. What do we call the people who work for a company? What do we call the people who work for a company? Employee. What do we call the people who live next to you? What do we call the people who live next to you? Neighbor. Who is in charge of a museum or art gallery? Who is in charge of a museum or art gallery? Curator. What type of gas do we breathe out? What type of gas do we breathe out? Carbon dioxide. What do we call the device used to generate electricity? What do we call the device used to generate electricity? Generator. What do we call the area where the weather is dry and hot and there is a lot of sand? What do we call the area where the weather is dry and hot and there is a lot of sand? Desert. What subject involves the study of gravity, electricity, and so on? What subject involves the study of gravity, electricity, and so on? Physics.